now we have with us the amazing, incredible Kim.com. And we're so glad that he was able to speak to us, because I know that, Kim, you have an incredibly, incredibly busy schedule all of the time. So thank you for taking the time to support Julian Assange again, because you've been instrumental in putting together the first Vigil and continuing to push for public support of Assange. And I hope, I don't know if your mic is still muted. On the bottom left, there will be an unmute button. Zoom mutes panelists for some reason. I believe you're still muted, Kim. So basically on the bottom left hand side of the Zoom interface, there should be a mute button, and you need to there you go. Great. Thank you.
All done.
Great.
First, I'd like to apologize for the delay. I have two computers here, and they both refused to boot up. So
wow.
I'm on my phone. I don't believe this is a coincidence, but here I am.
That does not sound coincidental at all. And I'm so glad that you prevailed over the technological hurdle there, because it's so important to have voices like yours speak out on this issue.
Thank you.
Well, so since we last appeared on a stream for Julian Assange, a lot of things have happened, and unfortunately he's obviously still silenced. And I wanted to just start off with how what your thoughts on the developments of the last couple of months since our last Vigil.
Well, the most interesting development really only happened a couple of days ago, when Lenin Moreno gave an interview to Deutsche Welle to talk about Julian Assange and why he has been silenced. And basically what he's saying is that they are silencing Julian Assange because he practices journalism. He is reporting about political issues, and that's why they are silencing him. And when you think about that for a moment, you realize that this is not only completely unlawful, you know, to say that we're not allowing you to communicate with the outside world anymore because you practice journalism, but it's also completely unethical, immoral, and just shows the shift in Ecuador towards the US position and the years of lobbying by the US empire have finally come to fruition with this attack against Julian on no legal basis whatsoever. And that, to me, is the most astonishing news in the last few days, because there's really no legal basis for Ecuador to do this.
Absolutely. And not only is there no basis for it, but it actually it breaches the Constitution. I don't have the exact article that it breaches in front of me, but a number of commentators have pointed out that it is in breach of the Constitution of Ecuador itself. And as we all know, Julian Assange is a citizen of Ecuador, and so this is in direct, contradiction to his rights as a citizen of Ecuador. So at this time, in this kind of dire strait that we're seeing Julian Assange in, where he's been in the embassy, gagged from communications with his family, friends, and the outside world for, going on, we're going into the third month of that situation. What do you think is the most effective way that people can help that are watching and that are concerned for Julian Assange?
You know, I have to say, unfortunately, I'm a little bit disillusioned because there's just not enough happening. You know, we did the first Vigil. I see a lot of tweets about it, but there isn't really the outrage that one would expect in circumstances like this. And it makes me so unhappy. It makes me realize that the vast majority of people are eating the narrative that is given to them by the fake news media, and by their politicians, and they are not standing up for the guy that is standing up for our rights, for the whole world, for peace, for justice, you know, and it makes me so angry and really almost depressed. I'm never a depressed person. I'm a very positive person, but you know, when you realize that someone who is so well documented in his actions as Julian Assange, the injustices are well documented, all the facts are out there for everyone to see, that there's not an outrage internationally on a massive scale to stop this bullying against him, this life-threatening torture against him, the disrespect of the laws and you know, human rights against Julian Assange. You know, that there isn't this outrage makes me mad. I just can't understand it. I think it's unbelievable, and I think almost to an extent, you know, that we are doomed as a human race if we cannot stand up for the most obvious of injustices. If we cannot,
absolutely,
you know, if we cannot unite to let the whole world know what's going on and then stand together to prevent it. Unfortunately, in the world that we live in today, there's so much injustice. It's almost impossible to pick a cause and be heard, you know? And then what I often get when I tweet about Julian Assange, or I take on a cause like Princess Latifah recently,
absolutely.
you know, people always reply and say, well, why don't you care about the children that die in Yemen? Why don't you care about this war or that war, or, you know, the justice system in general? And of course, you know, you can go on for 2-3 hours and pick a cause of injustice because there are so many of them.
Absolutely.
But in, and I think the risk that we all have with the Julian Assange case is, if they manage to defeat Julian, if they manage to break him and destroy WikiLeaks, we are doomed, because the check on democracy is supposed to be the media. And if the media understands that if you report the wrong thing that the government or the deep state establishment does not want you to report about, then we can and will destroy you. Which means we will not hear what WikiLeaks is telling us from other media outlets, and it means we are going to live a life of stupidity. We're going to be living in a world where we are kept away from the truth. And that is something, you know, that really frustrates me a lot, that there are not more people who understand the reality of the Assange case and what it means to them individually. Yes, all these wars are going on. Yes, all these people are getting killed. But in your country where you live, you know, let's say you live in a democracy, what is the value of that democracy to you? What does it mean if you no longer have checks and balances against government agencies that have purely commercial interests, that are power hungry, want to extend their, you know, deep state secret powers and basically treat politicians like puppets and move them around on the chessboard as they please? What does it mean to you individually if we do not stand up for WikiLeaks and press freedom and the right of us to receive information that we should have in the first place? It should never have been kept from us. We elected the people that created these agencies, and that should be accountable to us, report to us. It is us, the citizen, who pick those in power. You cannot keep information from us. You cannot use your powers or abuse your powers against the citizenry. But that is what's happening around the world. That
Absolutely.
is the live in today. We are not free citizens. We are dumbed down idiots that are consuming a narrative from the mainstream media that is doctored by lobbyists and deep state agencies to sell us wars, sell us conflict, to tell us how good we are to stand up against these nations for terrorism and all that. But what we do not understand and what we do not learn is what's really happening in the background, the shifting of massive arms contracts, the vast size of the intelligence economy, and their interest and what they do to further that and how they lie to us. So if WikiLeaks falls, we are in a very bad situation globally, because that will be used as an example to stifle investigative journalism and to stifle truth-telling. I'm just shocked about the state of silence by so many powerful voices that now have a real opportunity to stand up and do something. There is not enough happening in this case.
I completely agree. I think the silence really is ominous, and I think part of what contributes to that might be that the people who support Assange, who totally agree with everything you just said, may feel as if they run out of options and ways that they can help. And I think that I hope that part of what people take away from this vigil is that they have to act, just as you're saying, and I hope that it increases public actions on this. Do you have any specific actions you want people to take that can get out in the streets to be protesting? I know that there's a vigil on the 19th for the anniversary of Assange is entering the embassy, but are there any really specific actions you want people to take? And sorry, my audio is messing up. I'm going to check that situation shortly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, if you have social media, tweet about it. After this vigil is over, the videos will be available on YouTube. I'm sure there will be some nice edits. I just saw Ross in the previous segment, and what a brilliant guy. Everything that he had to say was just the essence of truth. And I invite everyone who may miss the segment to watch it, or tell your friends about it. Especially if you're in Australia, it's quite shocking what the Australian government is willing to do to support bullying and war against Julian Assange, one of their citizens. And I think more Australians also need to stand up for one of their own. So what Ross had to say was some powerful stuff. And I really appreciated that segment. And Ross, if you're watching, thank you very much. I think, use your social media, but also just talk with, friends and family about it. The thing that I always get from people who have no idea about Julian Assange is the press tidbits that they picked up about him being some kind of sexual predator, a shady kind of guy. And this is exactly what the US empire and the deep state wanted people to think about Julian, because they want to discredit his work. They want to discredit his character to make his voice less significant. And they have done an incredible job in getting into the mainstream mindset that Julian Assange is some kind of bad guy, when he is absolutely not. All the evidence is out there. If you just spend half an hour and you go, for example, to Justice for Assange, you can see the truth, and it's all out there. But the general gist you know, for people out there is he's some kind of bad guy. And you know, the hard work that anyone who understands a bit more about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange has to do is really to crack through that first. You know, let people know actually he is not a shady guy. He's not a criminal. These charges don't even exist. There was no case. This is all political, and really just try, like in 5 to 10 minutes, to explain what the reality is, and then maybe you will get through to people. You know, maybe then they realize, okay, maybe I should be doing a bit more reading about it or get a bit better understanding about it. But that is really the first step to penetrate this false mindset of people that Julian is some kind of bad guy, you know. And we've seen it many, many times in history. History again repeats itself, you know. Some of the greatest scientists of the world for many hundreds of years have been labeled as heretics, as crazies, as unworthy of people's attention and so on, and burned on fires and killed and tortured. And here we are in our modern age, the internet era, and the same thing is still happening. And it's happening in front of us with more facts than we have ever had.
That is incredible, an amazing point.
Yeah. So, you know, for me, it's crazy. We have learned nothing. You know, we all these history books are filled with examples of Julian Assanges in the history of the world and how they have been mistreated and abused. A late acknowledgement arrives that these people were right. They were doing the right thing. They were advancing us as humanity. And Julian fits into that category. You know, he is someone who is completely misunderstood by the majority of the people out there. And it happened many times in the past. And all this injustice, everything that is happening to him, is only allowed to happen because the minds of the people have been polluted by the filth that the US empire and the deep state has been throwing at him through their media outlets. And let's just call it what it is. The deep state controls the media. You know,
absolutely.
They plant their own people inside the media. They have these silent agents that they can activate to basically take one of their press releases or stories that they write for them to publish that under their name. And so we are faced with a media landscape where internationally you have thousands of journalists that are part of the deep state propaganda operation. You
absolutely.
And that in itself, this whole situation is one that, if we understand that to be the truth, and the evidence is out there, and WikiLeaks has provided that many times over, well, that's why we need to support WikiLeaks, you know, because if those people take over, and they have already done in great part what we hear and read in the news, well, then we are really just, being force-fed all these lies over and over and over again until we believe them, you know? So WikiLeaks is in my mind, a very, very important institution that needs to be protected, because if we lose it, and if we lose Julian Assange, well, then what do we have left? Like, think about it. What media out there? You know, we have these small media outlets like yourself, Elizabeth. I enjoy reading your work. You know, it's fantastic. It's unbiased. It's facts oriented. But you know, your readership is very small, and you reach a niche audience the mainstream media that controls the television networks and the large online media, they are all in the hands of the deep state and of the establishment, and they will tell you anything that furthers their agenda, and they will shoot down everything that takes us closer to the truth. And more and more people are waking up to this reality, but not enough. It's not the acceleration of knowledge in the citizenry is not fast enough, And I really don't know. I really don't know how to accelerate it or what to do about it, other than saying to people, educate yourself. You are ignorant as long as you don't have the knowledge. If you are not willing to take your time and learn about these things, well, then you are ignorant. You're going to live in a stupidity bubble, and you are not going to advance in any way. You will be stuck with the narrative that they are feeding you. But if you educate yourself and you go to WikiLeaks, you go to Justice for Assange, you go to media outlets like the one that you run, Elizabeth, then you might find the truth. You might find the wisdom to understand what's really going on with Julian Assange. And only then will you be able, to make some noise and stand up against this incredible injustice.
I completely agree. And I think that one aspect of what you're saying is absolutely that fighting for Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, his human rights, his right to act as a journalist and simply do his job, is not just fighting for him. It's fighting for ourselves, and it's in our interest to do so. So I think that you couldn't have said it any better, as far as just the recognition that people have to act on this if they want a future that is not completely a corporate or establishment narrative. So basically, though, I guess I'd like to ask, what I know that you're very you feel disillusioned with the situation as it stands. Not to.
I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm
absolutely,
sure
absolutely.
Everyone watching this right now, anyone who cares about Julian will understand this feeling that I just shared. It is so frustrating. It is so frustrating to see how little is done for Julian. When all the facts are out there. While I have some time, later in the segment, what I would like to do is really make a case for Julian and against the deep state, for what Julian stands for and what he has given us, against what the deep state is doing and breaking laws and undermining our human rights. I would like to go into that a little bit so that people understand better why it is absolutely necessary and worthy of our support, to help Julian.
Absolutely. No, please do speak about that. I know that our viewers and myself would be very interested to hear your thoughts on that subject. It's really important. So please let us know what your thoughts are on that.
Okay, so let's just make the case for WikiLeaks for a moment. The case for WikiLeaks is, what has WikiLeaks done for society, for humanity, that is worthy of our attention and worthy of our support. WikiLeaks has told us of numerous war crimes that were committed around the world by the most powerful countries and allies in the world, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and elsewhere around the world. That is really how WikiLeaks started, with this video collateral murder and so on. And over many, many years, what we have learned is that politicians are for sale, that there's a pay-for-play system in place where lobbyists of large corporations and the military-industrial complex can use their wealth to influence political outcomes, to get laws enacted, to get favors. And, WikiLeaks has shown us many, many examples of that. The most recent example was, of course, Hillary Clinton with her Clinton Foundation, which was basically a one-stop shop for anyone who wanted to buy political favors. You donate to this fake charity, and you get whatever you want from the Clintons. And when a public servant who has never been an entrepreneur, who has never run any business or created any product, all of a sudden is worth in the hundreds of millions of dollars, like in the case of the Clintons. They are extremely rich, a very wealthy family that flies around the world in private jets, holidays on private islands and on super yachts. Their career, it was the career of a public servant, of someone who was elected into office to represent the people. Well, how did they get so rich? They got so rich because they sold their influence and their power to the highest bidder. And we know that today because of WikiLeaks. And if they do that, you can be sure that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of other politicians that do that around the world. So WikiLeaks has put a big spotlight on corruption, which is really valuable to us as citizens, because this kind of corruption completely undermines any kind of consideration for the people to make decisions and enact laws that help us. These corrupt politicians enact laws and abuse their power to further the interests of those who give them money. And that is the biggest reality in politics today, that it's all for sale. And thanks to WikiLeaks, we have a better understanding of that. And you need to understand that because WikiLeaks puts this information out there, obviously he is the target that he is, because they don't want their business to be disrupted. They want to keep making millions of dollars through corruption, and WikiLeaks is in the way of that. WikiLeaks has also educated us about the deep state and how the intelligence community has really become the master of the political process. They completely influence and dominate politicians in their decision-making process. They provide them with information that furthers their own agendas, which is the intelligence community wants to be more powerful. It's called the deep state for a reason, because they want to run things. They want to run things outside of the Constitution, outside of oversight and regulation, and just do what they think is best for the country. And often what they think is best for the country is also in par with what's best for the corporations, the war machine, the private contract.
I believe we have just... there you go. The connection dropped for 1 second, but you're back. No problem.
Yeah, okay, I'm back. So what I was saying is they are operating to increase their own power in the shadows, to use their influence over politicians with two ways. Number one, they provide intel that is hard to question, because they say, well, we have all these tools, we have all this information, and what we give to you is the truth. When we know many times over, they have lied to politicians, they are social engineering politicians and leaders to achieve the outcome that they want. And then on top of that, we know that they manipulate intelligence, they manipulate evidence to get a politician or a leader to do what they want them to do. And all of it, again, is based on a mix of commercial interests, where the biggest corporations in the war industry and the war machinery want another action being taken somewhere around the world. When the warehouses are full and the bombs are all bought and the order books are empty, that's when the war machine wants their deep state lobbyists to start another war, because
Exactly.
they need to make money, and the weapons deliveries need to continue. And if they don't, then that entire industry will crumble. And so the reality that this is going on is completely reflected in all of these releases by WikiLeaks, where you see the emails of security contractors, you see the communications, that lead to war, that create the narratives that make us want to go to war. When every single time the outcome is disastrous and millions of people die, and the mainstream media cheers about what's happening and how the US is spreading their democracy around the world, and in reality, every single time it's a massive crisis with children and innocent citizens dying all around the world, simply, and this is the key point, simply to make money from their misery. Because that is what this is really all about. There are a couple of interesting websites. One of them is a site that has counted the number of civilian deaths around the world since World War II caused by US foreign policy and wars. And over 30 million people have died as a result of that warfare for profit around the world. That's an incredible number.
Yeah.
And it's all, backed up with evidence, and of course, it's a time frame of over many, many decades. But when you realize that this killing is going on solely for the purpose of making money and increasing their power and their global foothold, well, if we didn't have WikiLeaks, and if we didn't have investigative journalism that points us to the facts behind it, or releases the documents that show this, well, this will keep happening. And the biggest threat really to this machinery of war and war for profit, the biggest threat really is the internet, and is the technologies that allow us to access information so efficiently, search through large databases, and identify all of these things that are going on. And WikiLeaks really has provided us with so much insight. But let's go on. What else has WikiLeaks told us? All major nations have signed up to the Human Rights Charter, Magna Carta, all the outstanding legal frameworks that give us our human rights. One of those human rights is our right to privacy. It's enshrined in the Human Rights Charter. Yet the deep state is surveilling us at every opportunity, from your location data to your emails to your communications, anything you do, even your webcam, your smart devices, your handsets, everything today is backdoored, and everything is unsafe for you to use. And if you ever become a person of interest, your entire communication history, all your movements, wherever you've gone in the world, is stored in your phone through your location data, and these deep state agencies have access to that. Even if you disable location services on your phone, they're still running and submitting all your movements. So there's basically a map of every single person that has a smartphone in the world, where they have been over the last 5 years. They can reconstruct every single movement that you've made, every communication that you've made. And if we didn't have WikiLeaks or people like, leakers like Edward Snowden, we would not know about these things. And this is why the deep state hates WikiLeaks and hates Julian Assange, because we are interfering in their illegal gathering of our private information, which is happening in total breach of the human rights that we have and are enshrined in the UN Human Rights Charter. And they are in total breach of international law as well, which prohibits this kind of activity. And yet here we are, the person who shows us all of this and explains it all to us is the person that is being persecuted. It's not the perpetrators. We're not going after the James Clappers or the leaders in these intelligence agencies that gather your data en masse completely illegally. We're going after the guy who told us about it, And the same with Edward Snowden. We're going after the guy who's done the right thing and said, I can't be a part of this. I know what's going on here. I can't do this anymore, and releases information to the public. These people are vilified. They are hunted. And ultimately, they are being thrown into jail or killed. Yet they provide the greatest service to humanity in recent history by warning us about it, by telling us about it. So it's perverse that there are not more people standing up for Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, and everyone who is a truth teller, and that truth telling is now a crime, and that they can pursue someone like Julian in the way they do without much repercussion. That is really the biggest problem in society today, that we allow this to happen.
That's a
we
massive
allow this
point.
to happen,
Yeah.
And that means it puts us on a path where we will not be able to escape this new reality, that every person has zero privacy, that their entire communication and movement information is available to governments around the world, and they use this for really control. They will use it ultimately to control their population, and at one point in time in the future, it is a given, based on the history of the world, we will have a leader again who is evil and who will use this power against us. And then we will have absolutely no way to defend ourselves. You will not be able to hide, who you're communicating with, what you were thinking, and that goes all the way into the past since these systems have been established. So we are basically toast. If we ever run into a situation where a leader wants to abuse it, we are all fucked. And it's already being abused, let's say, in a soft way. Obama used these spying powers to spy against the Trump campaign, and then when they found something that they thought would be helpful to destroy the Trump administration, they unmasked communications that were supposed to be totally private, and then leaked that stuff to their friends, to their paid friends in the media, the so-called journalists. And if Obama can do this, And Trump is using these systems as well now. Well, what if, we will be in a place in the future where a leader says, I want world domination. I don't want any dissent. I don't want any opposition. We need to crush down on this part of the population and make sure that we remain in power forever. And believe you me, that is going to happen again. It has happened in history hundreds of times. Don't think that because we are in a period of relative peace that that's not going to happen again. So by providing these types of powers and tools to a deep state that doesn't even answer to us, doesn't even answer to normal courts, everything they do happens in total secrecy. They have some hand-picked judges that they like, that give them the powers to do what they do. It's a complete joke. It's a complete undermining of our democracy and our rights. And WikiLeaks is the biggest threat to what they are doing, to their criminal activity. And that's why they're trying to get rid of Julian and silence him. And the fact that there's not more outrage about it is extremely frustrating to me, because I can see what's going on, and I can see how this is going to get worse and worse for all of us.
And speaking of the silencing of Assange, I'm hearing feedback from Susie that the Unity4J Twitter account is actually being shadow banned, and that there's a censorship of the hashtag Unity4J, the tag on Twitter. So I would ask everyone, Kim, everyone watching, to please go tweet as much as you possibly can to break that censorship, because if people don't hear this message from people like Kim and our amazing panelists, then there is just no hope left, as Kim is saying. So please do not let that censorship.
Another important point to make for WikiLeaks: all these tech companies, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft, you name it, every major tech company that is in the US, that is collecting massive amounts of data about their users, is in bed with the deep state. The executives of those companies get all the benefit of the powers that the deep state holds. The powers include not being scrutinized as much by the government, getting tax benefits, which is real dollars into their pockets for selling out their users. And that's what's happening in reality. And these tech company CEOs are openly politically biased. They pick their candidates and they then use their platforms to try and get them elected. And something like the Trump surprise victory surely is never going to happen again in the future, because everyone has underestimated the power of the people and their minds. And, they will adjust their manipulation. They will make it smarter and do it in a way that is not as obvious as it is today, because they are learning from their mistakes. And the problem is that they are really embedded with the deep states. They have backdoors in their softwares that allow the intelligence community to know everything about you, and they are doing it willingly and happily. And you've seen just today, Google executives have told their workers that they are no longer working on this Pentagon contract where they help with AI and they help with more advanced systems for drones and for the Pentagon. And the fact that that is even going on, that a company like Google that started with the slogan "Don't be evil," is now working as a contractor for the military industrial complex to make drone attacks more efficient and provide search algorithms to spy agencies so that they can find out better who you're friends with and your movements, and create beautiful maps and beautiful data collections about everything that you are and who you are. That is what Google does today. You know, they are colluding with the deep state to provide better tools to make it easier to spy on you. You know, and we live in this environment where you know, Twitter is shadow banning people. They're not even telling anyone about it, and they're doing it to interfere with opinions. They're doing it to make sure that not more people understand what's happening to Julian Assange, and that the number of people that support him don't reach critical mass. They are doing it very effectively in a shadowy way, and you know, unfortunately, this is the platforms we're all working on. You know, we're all using these technologies to try and make a difference and to try and rally people, yet at the same time the message doesn't get across, because silently in the shadow realm they are blocking these communications, they are stopping it from trending. And you know, in Twitter's case, it's really Jack, the CEO's love for Hillary Clinton, and how bitter he was when his favorite candidate lost. You know, and you see that Twitter is quite aggressive in shadow banning conservative voices, you know, especially the people that are supporting Trump. And when tech companies abuse their power in this way, you know, even more important that we have institutions like WikiLeaks that tell us about it, where Twitter programmers can take this algorithm and leak it to WikiLeaks, because I'm sure there are many people within Twitter, just like the 4,000 Google employees that wrote and signed an internal letter to Google executives saying, we don't want to be involved in the war machine. We don't want to have contracts with the Pentagon. Just like that, within Twitter, you will have people that say, you know, the shadow banning and this manipulation of opinion is not something that I want, and therefore I leak the source code, or I leak the algorithm, or the whole technique behind this shadow banning to WikiLeaks. And that's why we need something like WikiLeaks. It's really the last place, the last bastion where you can go if you are involved in an organization that is systematically lying to you, that is breaking the law, that is manipulating you. You know, there will be individuals that are not happy with that are going to provide a leak. They are going to, at great risk to themselves, release information. And where else do you go if WikiLeaks isn't around? You know, you can't go to the New York Times, you can't go to The Guardian, you can't go to any of these press outlets today, because they are all corrupt. They themselves would rather take your leak and give it to the deep state sources and say, well, how are we going to deal with this? What narrative can we create to combat this? You know, they are all in bed. And that is why it's so important that you fight for WikiLeaks.
Absolutely. And in the last few minutes of this segment, if you have any thoughts that you'd like to just close with, I mean, that was an amazing, you know, concept in itself to broach with people. But if you have any final thoughts, please, you know, share them with the viewers.
Well, I made the case for WikiLeaks. In my last words, I like to make the case against those that are abusing their power. And you raised it earlier, Elizabeth, and it's a very important point. People always say, why doesn't he step out of the embassy and face justice? And the most regrettable fact that I have learned over the last 7 years myself, through my case, but also by following the case of Julian and many others that are being attacked by the deep state, the reality is the justice system itself is rigged. You are not going to get justice because they are shopping for judges that are going to give them the results that they want. They are going to promote judges or remove judges from your case. They are going to use their power, to make sure that you don't have a level playing field. They will use terms like national security to make sure that no one gets to see your evidence. They are going to use all kinds of methods to make sure that this hearing against you is private and that the citizenry will never even understand what is going on in your case. And when you look at the judgments that were issued against WikiLeaks in Sweden, or most recently in the United Kingdom, they are not about upholding the law. They are all political. And when you look at the judgments and you look how, the justice was done, it really becomes quite apparent that there is no justice. So for Julian to take a gamble and to say, I'm going to leave the embassy and I'm going to allow the UK to have this extradition battle, which is going to take 5 or 6 or 7 years through all the instances, with almost a certain outcome because of the political nature of his case of extradition, and then being extradited to the United States, to the Eastern District of Virginia, and be in a courtroom in Alexandria where basically the entire populace of that region is somehow involved or associated with people in the intelligence community. You're basically being asked to trust a jury, if you even get to a jury trial, because of the secretive nature of your proceeding. But let's say you get a jury, then they will make sure that the people on the jury will be, members of the intelligence community. And so they are completely manipulating the judicial process. It's a complete abuse of process. And they're doing it so openly now, so ridiculously openly. And there's not really any outcry about it, that Julian Assange, if he were to leave the embassy, is guaranteed to be extradited and guaranteed to be found guilty in the United States of some created bogus crime that doesn't even apply to him. And that is why, everyone needs to understand, that is why he is not leaving the embassy. He is fighting the fight that he fights, because not only is the media manipulated and politicians are manipulated, but our judiciary as well. And that.
And I seem to have lost audio with Kim. Can anyone else hear?
Kim.
Okay. The audio is back now.
Sorry?
Yeah, the audio cut out, at least on my end, for a couple of seconds there. I just wanted to check. It's fine now.
So the final word that I have really is that the judicial system cannot be trusted to protect the rights of Julian Assange. It is us, the people, who have to stand up for him, and our voices need to be heard. And we need to be more noisy and more aggressive in making sure that those in power understand that we will not allow them to abuse their power to punish Julian Assange for what is essentially nothing more than truth-telling. That is what he is persecuted for telling us the truth.
Incredible thoughts to conclude that segment. Thank you, Kim, so much for joining us today as you joined us and as you instigated the first vigil, the Reconnect Julian vigil that went for I believe over 10 hours. Thank you so much for joining us, And I hope that people really take to heart everything that you've said. It's really, really perceptive and important concepts that I hope that I hope the viewers react to and really do go out and become much more vocal for Julian Assange.
I hope so too. All the best.